morning, members of council and members of staff. I'll apologize in advance. I've come down with a summer cold 2 days ago, the hottest day so far of the year, and I got a cold. So I might be coughing and sniffling through this presentation, but I'll try my best to get through. So I want to just go over quickly where we're at in the process. I want to cover off some of the principles that we've developed with the public, talk about the two options, talk a little bit about the feedback we've received at the latest public PIC, Public Information Center, and then tell you our next step. So we're about midway through the process right now. We've identified opportunities and constraints. We've had two open house workshops with the public. We developed two land use and transportation options. Right now we're evaluating those options based on some criteria we've developed through the process. Over the summer we'll be using that evaluation to pick a preferred land use option, coming back to the public in September with an open house, and then back before council with a secondary plan in the end of this year. So I want to go over just briefly a couple of the principles for the study. We've developed these through the public input, starting with the first workshop with the public. First one is community structure and the principle, and these principles we're using to create the criteria and evaluate the options. So they set the tone for the secondary plan area, though we'll likely have those set out as principles or objectives in the secondary plan itself. So in the community structure, the two major local centers will function as core areas of the community, really the structure the community around those two centers, one at Yonge Street and one at the GO station along Green Lane. And Green Lane is to be a pedestrian transit supportive corridor. On mobility, support existing and planned transit, including the future transit along Green Lane, as well as the other transit corridors along the arterial and collector roads, and provide a range of transportation choices, which means biking, cycling, pedestrian, and transit, and car travel. Interface with Newmarket, the principles have a compatible and appropriate transition to the residential area in Newmarket. Provide connectivity to Newmarket through existing connections, future road connections. We've shown one future road connection, and pedestrian cycling connection. So there's integration of the two residential areas. Healthy living and walkability is a really important element, and is a key element of how we're locating the land uses and the street light to promote walkability, to promote active living, and ensuring that through the policies that the streetscapes are designed to be pedestrian comfortable, not just traffic sewers, but comfortable for pedestrians, comfortable for the cyclists. The natural heritage system is to be protected and really is an asset in the community, and we arrange the community to focus on the natural heritage system and the valley lands. Our natural hazards, the floodplains are identified and protected. They come into the development area just in a few locations along the Holland River. Providing for a range of housing choices, tenure, sizes is an important principle. Phasing and fiscal sustainability is very important, and we'll be looking at that through the study so we don't place unnecessary costs on new owners or on the municipality and the existing ratepayers. Managing traffic is a significant issue, and we're trying to balance Green Lane as a high-capacity arterial road crossing through the community, as well as creating that as the spine of the community, so that it's not just a traffic corridor, but it's also a major transit corridor. It's also a pedestrian corridor. It will also be a cycling corridor. So it's balancing all those needs along Green Lane. Sustainability, incorporate climate change adaptation measures. Be sensitive to the area's heritage culture. At the same time as we're doing the secondary plan, there's another team working on the MESP, and they're working on the servicing side. So we'll be ensuring that water and wastewater are based on the spine servicing approach, and plan to reduce long-term costs of maintenance. And lastly, complete community is a mix of land uses to foster that complete community. And you'll see that in the land use options. So we've got two land use options. I've put these both option 1 in the top, option 2 in the bottom, and I'll just quickly go through some key elements with council. First is the major local centers. You'll see that we have two major local centers, one at Yonge and Green Lane in both options, and slightly different. What we're trying to do with these two options is not pick two perfect options, but try and create options that are slightly different that we can evaluate and pick out what's preferred. And when we do the evaluation, we won't, option one likely won't be preferred and option two won't be preferred, but we're looking at different elements of them. And most likely when I do this, we come up with a hybrid option that's the best elements of both, but we try to make them different enough that we can evaluate those best elements. So we have the commercial mixed use located at the, just north of Green Lane at the intersection, the existing commercial area on the east side, a new commercial mixed use on the west side, and a combination in option one of commercial and residential mixed use. We also see with a dotted line potential new pedestrian-oriented retail. We certainly want the retail up to the street and pedestrian-oriented, but we're talking about a more significant, more retail shopping street, a more traditional retail shopping street. The landowner to the north has proposed a development, so we showed that as one option, with a second one through the commercial residential mixed use on the east, on the west side. We also thought, well, there could be another option where we do it joint on both sides of this east-west collector road, and look at it continually through both sides and connecting. Create quite an interesting focus for this major local center. The major local center at the second one at the GO station at second concession. Option one, we orientate the mixed use more along Green Lane, and option two, we orientated more along second concession. A lot of the feedback we've gotten is maybe we should be looking at more density at the Green Lane, at the GO station location, and also why not, we've had some people comment, why not another pedestrian-focused retail street at that node as well. So it's something we'll be looking at from the comments. These are some of the pictures we'll be, that give a, that we showed to the public, give a focus of what those mixed-use areas could look like, with a combination of apartments with retail at the grade. This would be an example of pedestrian-oriented retail, real focus of pedestrians along it. Could be a pedestrian street, could be a car-oriented street with parking, on-street parking and wide sidewalks, so it could be a combination. It could be a combination of live-work-oriented shops. So these just give a sense of what it could look like as we develop that mixed use, and we'll be providing more details as we get to the preferred option. Next key element is the residential, the higher density residential. We've located those generally along Green Lane and the east-west, the mid-block collector road, the new collector road to the north, as well as around those local local nodes, major local nodes. So on option one, we have it to the north along both sides along Yonge Street, as well as along the collector roads coming north and along Green Lane. Moving east, you'll see we have the medium density. A medium density 2 would be more of stacked townhouses, low-rise apartments located along Green Lane, and then in clusters along the east-west collector road, as well as the higher density around the GO station, the medium density and medium density 2. We also have high density surrounding the community park in option 1, and high density surrounding the GO station. In option 2, you see slightly difference. We take rather than having the medium density along the collector road, we really cluster it in depth, on both east and west side of Yonge Street. Again, keeping it along Green Lane. But rather than have the clusters of the medium density 2 at the collector road intersections, we orientate them more around the two nodes. But then continue to have medium density along the east-west collector road as well as Green Lane. So very similar, but it's just how we cluster those densities in those two communities. The rest of the area then would be the low density residential development interior to the neighborhoods. In terms of the schools, locating the schools, particularly we have one secondary school that we need to locate, and it's a big issue because it's a fairly large land user, and we need that central to the area, and that's for the public school board. So we have two locations. In option one, we located on Green Lane. Secondary schools are also big transit users, so we're looking at trying to locate along transit. The question is, do we need it along the transit that Green Lane would be running, the higher priority transit line that's linking to the GO station, or do you need a more local transit? So in option 2, we look at it on the east-west collector road, and locating in that location, both on transit spines. And then the school boards have identified how many school sites are needed. We have looked at different options of campusing the school sites in the center, campusing them in option 1 versus separating them. This school site is generally the same. We look at this school site and moving it here in option 2. Comments from the school boards are, one, they want schools on Straight Street, so this location is not preferred. They don't really want it on Second Concession, so these 2 school sites may not be preferred. But other than that, they're fairly happy with those school sites. One aspect they're looking at is whether they can use the existing school sites in Newmarket, and whether school sites as close to Newmarket as this 2 locations are needed, or whether they move them further north. As you see in option 2, we have no school sites south of Green Lane, with the anticipation they may be able to use the school sites in Newmarket to house those students. So it's something we're supposed to get feedback from the school boards soon. Neighborhood parks, we largely on the neighborhood parks locate those beside the school sites or campusing them in the location of the school sites. So we've moved them around slightly. The bigger element is the community park and the community center. So we have 2 community parks, one on the west side. We see the 2 different locations, one on East-West Collector, one just north of Green Lane, and a central community park. And you see the 2 locations, one on East-West Collector adjacent to the Natural Heritage System, and over here by the railway track adjacent to the Natural Heritage System. 2 separate locations. One of the comments we've got, maybe it's not the best to locate this community park because you're right beside the railway track. You don't want the kids necessarily located beside the railway track, so it's something we have to look at. We also have to look at how we orientate it with the community center, which is an equally sized facility beside it. Then the road network, well, we're working with TMIG to evaluate the road network, and you see there's a number of different locations of road network, and really the collector road network really sets where we orientate those larger users, where we orientate the densities. So that's a fundamental aspect of the exercise, or we'll be looking at evaluating the options. One of the key aspects we have is in both options, option 1 and option 2, we look at an east-west collector midway between the new east-west collector and Green Lane, running through this community, generally both in the same location. There's existing road just on the north side of the commercial now, and that would be extended east-west. We're also looking at the opportunity to take the traffic system through a ring road system. So you'll see in option 1, the road system that goes through the commercial now, we would move that forward, and as that commercial development redevelops over time, that could become a public road linking the east-west collector to Green Lane. Same, we could have run a collector road on the west side, and in the future, south of Green Lane, as that commercial development intensifies in the future, you could also get a continuation of that ring road system, which is why we've shown it as dotted. It's something to plan for in the future as a possibility. And then you could get a ring road system which could take the traffic off the intersection of Yonge Street and Green Lane, help distribute that traffic a little bit more. In option 2, we do similar. We move the collector road a little closer at the light, the existing signalized intersection, and then have another north-south collector road at the other signalized intersection. And then that, again, creates a ring road system. Over at by the second concession, the GO station, we look at similar aspects of a bit of a ring road system. Option 1, we have a western ring road system that connects from concession through and back south of Green Lane back to second concession. And in option 2, we have a partial from the east-west collector road coming down, and then doing a eastern side ring road system as well. So in both cases, you get a ring road system that helps take the traffic off those major intersections. Then we're also looking at some smaller collector roads on the south side of Green Lane, including in option 1 a connection through to the Bayview Avenue in this location. So those are all the collector roads that we'll be evaluating. A significant component of how we orientate the land uses, of course, in terms of the road network. So just briefly to go over what we've heard so far from the public at our last open house. We had a public open house in January, which was more on the visioning and we've got a fair amount of input up until late February. We've had a number of TAC, or Technical Advisory Committee, and Coordinating Committee meetings through the process, and that's really good feedback to us, and it's helped to form up the options, and will help us to using them as a sounding board for our preferred option as well. The last open house we had was on May 2nd, was on the 2 options, and we've got a fair amount of feedback from that as well. And some of the comments were, there was a positive response to the pedestrian Main Street, the orientated commercial in both options. Some people liked the separation, some people liked the concept of a continue on both sides, east and west of Yonge Street. And others mentioned the location at the GO station as another alternative. Many people acknowledge the need for density. Some question the market focus. Can we accommodate that now? People suggested more density around the GO station, and more of the development focus. Can we have that flexible to respond to the changing market conditions? Neighborhood commercial locations. There's a number of neighborhood commercial locations, and people suggested those would be great and help support walkability. Transportation network, we got a lot of comments on that. A lot of people supported the ring roads. Lots of different suggestions on changes to those ring roads and changes to the options. There was some that were Bayview Parkway extension. Some were negative Bayview Parkway extension. There certainly wasn't any consensus on that from the public. Some suggested overpasses for pedestrians over Green Lane, and some suggested that the connections, the collector road connections, weren't viable. So all of this information would be taken into consideration. We also had comments on the distribution of land uses. Some landowners were concerned about over-concentration of public uses. It's always a consideration of schools and parks. We look at it, how to best distribute the schools and parks to make a neighborhood that works in terms of walkability to the parks, walkability to the schools, what meets the school board's concerns. So that's our primary function. We recognize, though, that if we have too much on one landowner, it's a concern, but our primary look at it is how to properly distribute for a future urban community, but we will take into consideration the focus of all on one landowner's properties. Opportunities for more density at key locations was suggested. Some people raised the lack of employment lands, not realizing that you have another secondary plan that will be commencing east of Leslie Street to provide that employment. So there's employment right beside the community, but many people at the public meeting, at the PICs, didn't realize that looking at the plans, there's no employment. Where's the employment? So we'll have to make that clear in the next public information sessions. And people like the campusing of schools, parks. A lot of people commented on the trail system, like the trail systems that were shown. There's a lot of comments, particularly from landowners, on where the best locations for the high school and the community center and the community park should be located, because those are large land users. So we're going to have a lot of more comments, I imagine, on that as we work through the process. So next steps of the study, we're applying the evaluation criteria right now. We should have that finished by the end of this month. And then we'll be using that to frame up a preferred land use option, and we'll be doing that through the summer. We'll be meeting with the Technical Advisory Committee and the Coordinating Committee, and coming back to the public with preferred land use option in September, and then the secondary plan to you in the late fall, end of the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Members of council, questions or comments at this time? Councillor Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I like your gray dotted areas that represent pedestrian-oriented retail. I would have thought there would have been another one just north of the GO station going northward. Nice little dotted thing going, and a little bit of red around that area as well. This council and several staff members have toured Crocker Park and Levis Commons, and we were very impressed with the fact that both sides of the street were a participant in making that pedestrian-friendly and family-friendly area for people to shop. it needs to have the high density as well. So I'm not opposed to having the higher density apartments and things behind it or above it. I just thought that if you were to do these 2 red strips along Green Lane, which is going to be a very wide, traffic-oriented road, it might be difficult for anyone to see the value of the commercial on both sides. So have you thought about anything going north and south there?
There's 2 aspects I'll address through your comments. One is the pedestrian-orientated street, and I agree with you, and something we missed. We're focused over on the other side, but all the mixed use should be orientated to the street and brought up to the street. But whether you should have a focused, real focused, shopping-orientated street. And we looked at only one, but I do agree, and we got a public comment. I thought, you know what, the public's right. We should have one over at GO. So we'll be looking at the GO station around that area. We'll be looking at that through the preferred option. And I agree that second concession is probably more easier to accommodate the retail and the shops up to the street. We still want Green Lane to be pedestrian oriented, but that's why we have 2 different options. We wanted to look at north, south, and east, west and evaluate those. But I do agree with you, second concession is probably a much more comfortable street in the future. Or we'll have it as maybe off that as a collector road, much even smaller street, much more comfortable for the pedestrians, and we could have it maybe at a cross street. So something we're going to look at over the summer and see what would work best there. We could
Further, Mr. Acting Mayor, I was thinking that it probably would need to be a secondary road. It seems that if the more intensity or more higher density buildings that are built in an area, the more likely it is that the region, and forgive me, Mr. Engineer, the engineers say, you know, well, the road has to be wider. Well, if you move your little shopping area over somewhere else and all your density, well, now that road has to be wider. So we have to find a road that we claim and keep as a road that's a pedestrian-friendly shopping area. And I thought it might work very well just directly north of the GO station and lead people to be able to take the transit and head to Toronto or come back, pick up a few bits of shopping, and then walk to their home right in that nearby area.
I agree.
Good,
So
thank you.
something we'll be looking at.
That's it for now, Mr. Acting.
Rachel Clemente?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I guess there's a lot of material to digest here. I'm mindful of the idea or the concept that Green Lane is essentially our Highway 7. And unfortunately, there's been an effort to make Highway 7 all things to all people. And it doesn't necessarily work in that respect. And we need to be cautious here that we're not recreating some of those same issues and challenges, in that we can't make Green Lane all things to all people. We need to pick what those uses will be and then use the rest of the road network, including the east-west collector, as with the ability or as an option to introduce some of those other uses that are important to us as well. And so I'm cognizant of that. I think my high-level concern echoes a little bit of what the public said about employment lands. And it's not, and I acknowledge that yes, there are prestige employment lands over by the 404, but this is highly oriented towards the residential land uses. And I would prefer to see more mixed. I'm not sure what the difference is between medium density 1 and medium density 2, and I don't know if it really matters to me, other than I'd prefer to see more opportunities for people to be able to work within a pedestrian, within a walking distance of where they live. And so we need to find that balance between residential and, we'll call it employment, we'll call it retail. I'm not sure what those words are, but there's the opportunity here for us to really create a mixture. I would prefer to see more happening along that local node at the GO station. That is really, aside from Yonge and Green Lane, second concession and Green Lane is really another huge asset for us. That transit intersection is huge for us, and we need to make sure that we're we're maximizing as much as we can there. I think I'll leave it with that for now. I've got quite a few other comments and questions, but I just wanted to sort of start that conversation and saying this looks like a lot of residential and not a lot of opportunity for medium and small businesses or even a larger business to locate along Green Lane.
Thank you. I have to concur with Councillor Roy DiClemente. I've looked at this and this particular area, and I understand and know that there's other components of Green Lane which we'll take into consideration for employment. But looking at this, to me, it just looks like, yeah, we have some commercial, some mixed commercial areas, but basically we're putting in a great big subdivision. And that concerns me, because the idea of what Green Lane potentially could be was to be considered a regional corridor. Have those special uses, which was going to make it more of a regional draw than a community draw. I think it's important how we interface with Newmarket, and it's really easy to interface with Newmarket if you just slam a couple more, low-density subdivisions up against it. I think we need to be a little bit more dynamic in what our thoughts are as it relates to this. And my question would be, how have we incorporated the regional centers and corridors policy in with this?
Certainly. So the densities are meant to achieve the regional centers and corridors density requirements. So they are. And in terms of the employment, certainly there would be office opportunities, particularly at the GO station. We've considered that. The aspect is how far do we go, and we'll need to have that conversation with council when we create the secondary plan of how far do we go of requiring landowners to provide for office or reserve sites for office, because we know it's not going to be the first market uptake is office development. But around a GO station, that is the logical location. I don't think we'd ever be able to get office development along the entirety of Green Lane, but around the GO station, yes. But the question we're going to have is how hard do we want to fight for that and preserve sites for the long term for that office development? And it's something we'll have to consider through it. That designation is meant to accommodate it, so it's something we'll look at again to make sure that we have an appropriate amount of that office. But that can both occur along Yonge Street and along Green Lane at the node at the GO station.
Consideration was given, and again, I'm going back a few years when the rapid transit was being planned in the connection. How have we integrated that into to this plan with having that extended up along Green Lane?
Oh, it's fully anticipated that's what we're planning for,
Yeah.
is that higher order transit extending from Yonge Street to the GO station. So that's fully anticipated, and that's why we're looking at the higher densities along Green Lane and at the GO station.
Other questions, comments, members of council? Councilor DiClemente?
One of the other items that you raised was related to the road network and the concept of ring roads and so on. When I look at these plans, my instinct is to suggest that I like it when intersections match up as opposed to splitting up your intersections. So, for example, in option 1, where there's a ring road that actually connects, there's at the east-west collector, for example, it's not a split intersection, whereas in option 2, they're split intersections. And so if you've got somebody who is trying to bypass, if you will, Second Concession or Green Lane, and they're trying to make a through connection, it's much easier to go straight through an intersection rather than to make a bunch of left-hand and right-hand turns. And so as somebody who often takes side streets in order to avoid congestion, I would prefer to see traffic flow much smoother. And if you start splitting up intersections, then it makes it more challenging to do that. My other feedback would be that I would prefer not to see schools directly on Green Lane. I think that's inviting challenges. We've got a fair number of schools already on regional roads, and those are the ones where we get a tremendous amount of feedback from the public about safety, about buses turning and parents dropping off, and children in active traffic on a regional road is not something that we'd like to be introducing. So that would be one of my pieces of feedback. And then also to ensure that where we are creating those pedestrian-friendly retail areas or those other retail areas, to ensure that the proposed trail network also connects to them. So we don't want to be creating a destination where everyone wants to go and check out the restaurants and the cool boutiques, and then they have to park their car, so you have to build a parking structure in order to accommodate that. But really, we want the people who are living in this area to be able to walk or ride their bike without going on to the East-West Collector or Green Lane to even access that. We'd like to create those networks, and there's a tremendous amount of natural heritage area here that allows for us to put those footpaths and cycling paths through. So I'll leave that
I
for now.
completely agree with you, absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, anything further? Mayor Haxon, do you have any questions or comments? You're good this time? Then with that, is there anything further from any members of council?
Move receipt.
Move receipt by Councillor Johnson. All those in favor? Opposed, and that's carried. Thank you very much. Madam Mayor, we've just completed the